The manager's hand slid a thick folder across the polished desk with a faint that felt louder than the humming air conditioner. My stepfather's grip on my upper arm tightened, hard enough to leave a bruise, but not hard enough for anyone else to notice. "Sign it," he muttered through a smile meant for the room, not for me. It was 3:17 on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of dull spring day when the bank smelled faintly of disinfectant and wet umbrellas. Outside, traffic lights blinked through the glass wall like patient warnings. Inside, my heart beat an uneven rhythm I refused to show on my face. What would you do if your own family stole your name? Don't miss a single second of this gripping revenge story. Hit play and feel every twist as it happens. I kept my voice steady. "I'm not signing anything." The words felt small compared to the folder in front of me. It was heavy, too heavy for a single loan document. The manager, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind square glasses, didn't look at me when he spoke. "Ms. Carter," he said softly, "these are the forms your family brought in last month. We just need a confirmation." Last month? I hadn't been here in years. My mother sat across from me, her lips pressed into the polite half-smile she wore for church committees and neighborhood barbecues. "Don't be dramatic," she said, smoothing the sleeve of her cream-colored sweater. "This is just paperwork for the house. You're making this harder than it needs to be." Her tone was syrupy sweet, but her eyes flicked toward the manager as if warning him not to interfere. The faint clink of her bracelet sounded like a clock counting down. I breathed in slowly, catching a trace of her perfume. Lavender, the same scent she used when I was a child. Once it meant comfort. Now it smelled like a mask. I turned to the manager. "I never signed anything. I never even knew about this." The words were calm, almost conversational, but a sharp current ran beneath them. I had an advantage they didn't know about, and it burned quietly in the pocket of my purse. My stepfather chuckled, low and dismissive. "She forgets things," he said, still smiling at the manager. "She's always been a bit scattered. You know how young people are." "Young? I'm 68. His words landed like an insult disguised as a joke, meant to shrink me down to a confused little girl. I didn't flinch. The manager cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said again, this time looking directly at me, "perhaps we should review the documents before." My mother cut in. "There's no need for all that. She just needs to sign where we indicated. We're already late for another appointment." Her voice sharpened at the edges, the first crack in her calm performance. I leaned forward, letting the chair creak beneath me. "Open the folder," I said to the manager. "Show me everything." He hesitated, eyes darting between my mother's frozen smile and my steady gaze. For a moment the only sound was the soft tick of the wall clock. When he finally unclipped the folder, the smell of fresh ink mixed with the paper's dry scent. He spread out the documents, loan agreements, refinancing forms, and signatures that looked eerily like mine. The handwriting was close enough to fool a stranger but not me. My stomach tightened, but I kept my face neutral. "That's not my signature," I said, pointing to the first page. The letters curved too neatly, like someone practicing for weeks. I traced the date with my fingertip. 2 weeks after my last doctor's appointment, a day I had been at the clinic for hours. I remembered because it rained so hard that day I had to change shoes in the lobby. My stepfather's smile thinned. "Of course it's yours. Who else would it be?" He shifted in his chair, his knee bumping the table. My mother shot him a quick glance, the kind of look couples share when a plan starts to wobble. Her fingers tightened around her purse strap. The manager adjusted his glasses and leaned closer to the page. "Miss Carter," he said carefully, "if you truly did not sign this, we may need to." My mother's voice snapped like a whip. "We don't need to involve anyone else. This is a family matter." Family matter. The phrase tasted bitter, like spoiled milk. I kept my focus on the manager. "Pay I asked, gesturing toward the stack of papers. He hesitated, then nodded. The pages were warm from the overhead light, the ink slightly raised beneath my fingertips. I flipped through them slowly, memorizing every date, every notary stamp, every line of my forged name. In my purse, my phone buzzed. A scheduled reminder. I had set it that morning, long before this meeting. A quiet signal to myself. Stay calm, record everything. I slipped it out just enough to stop the vibration and slid it back without anyone noticing. My secret advantage was already working. "Mom," I said, keeping my tone even, "when did we discuss this?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "We talked about it after Sunday dinner," she said too quickly. "You must have forgotten." I remembered every Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, my stepfather's constant stories, and never once a word about loans. The manager's brow furrowed. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "we should pause and review these details. It appears there may be some confusion." Confusion. Such a small word for what I saw on those pages. Theft, betrayal, a carefully planned trap. My stepfather leaned closer, his breath warm and sour with coffee. "Don't make a scene," he whispered so only I could hear. "This will all be fine if you just sign." The pressure of his fingers on my arm grew sharper, a silent threat wrapped in faux affection. I met his eyes and smiled, not a pleasant smile but a steady one. "I'm not signing," I said again, louder this time. My voice carried across the quiet room, drawing a quick glance from a teller behind the glass. The sound of her stapler echoed like a gunshot. My mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. "We're leaving," she said, her voice brittle. "This is ridiculous." The manager cleared his throat, his face pale but determined. "Ma'am," he said firmly, "I can't allow any action until we clarify this. Miss Carter has every right to review the documents." His eyes met mine, steady and sympathetic. I caught a faint reflection of myself in the polished surface of the desk. Silver hair pinned neatly, eyes sharper than they had been in years. For the first time in a long time I liked what I saw. Not a victim. Not a confused daughter. A woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Outside, a delivery truck honked twice, a jarring reminder that life continued beyond this tense little room. Inside, the air grew thick, each breath heavier than the last. My stepfather finally released my arm, his fingers leaving a dull ache beneath my sleeve. He leaned back, but his eyes burned with frustration. The manager gathered the papers back into the folder, his movements deliberate. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, almost like a secret, "you may want to consult legal counsel before making any decisions." The words slipped into the air like a hidden key. I felt them settle deep in my chest, unlocking something I had been holding back for years. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said. My mother's sharp inhale cut through the silence, but I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on the folder, on the proof of every lie they had built. My fingers itched to take it, but I knew patience would serve me better. As we stood, the manager's gaze lingered on me, a silent agreement passing between us. He knew more than he could say in front of them. And I knew I had just found the first ally in a fight they never expected me to start. The door to the office opened with a soft click, releasing the faint scent of new carpet into the hallway. My mother swept out first, heels striking the floor with angry precision. My stepfather followed, his shoulders stiff, his smile gone. I stayed a heartbeat longer, meeting the manager's eyes one last time. He gave the smallest nod, barely a movement but enough. I walked out into the cool spring air, the late afternoon sun slipping through gray clouds. The parking lot smelled of wet asphalt and fresh rain. My mother's voice floated back toward me, sharp and impatient, but I barely heard it. In my purse, my phone held a recording. In my mind, a plan had already begun to take shape. I closed the car door behind me and stared at the folder still on the manager's desk through the bank's glass wall. The folder that carried every stolen piece of my name. The folder that would, one way or another, give me back my life. They thought this was just paperwork. They had no idea it was the beginning of their downfall. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time we pulled into my mother's driveway, but the sky still hung heavy and gray, as if the clouds themselves were waiting for something to break. I sat in the back seat, fingers tight around the strap of my purse where my phone rested, still recording, still holding every word from the bank. My mother climbed out first, slamming her door hard enough to rattle the glass. My stepfather muttered under his breath, the sound swallowed by the damp evening air. I stayed a moment longer, watching the wipers drag across the windshield, each squeak scraping against the quiet fury in my chest. Inside, the house smelled of lemon cleaner and leftover coffee. The familiar scent should have been comforting, but tonight it felt sharp, almost metallic, like the air before a storm. My mother tossed her purse onto the hallway table and headed straight for the kitchen without looking at me. The faint jingle of her bracelet echoed through the house, each chime a reminder of her forced smile at the bank. My stepfather lingered near the door, pretending to remove his damp jacket, his eyes cutting toward me with a warning I refused to accept. I followed them into the kitchen, my shoes silent against the polished wood floor. The overhead light flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the white cabinets. My mother opened a drawer, pulled out a stack of envelopes, and began shuffling through them with brisk, unnecessary movements. She didn't ask if I wanted tea like she usually did. She didn't even glance at me. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice even. My stepfather turned sharply, his shoulders stiff. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his tone clipped. "That was a misunderstanding. Paperwork always looks scarier than it is." I studied his face, the tightness around his mouth, the faint flush creeping up his neck. A man who was used to control now scrambling to hold it. My mother finally looked up. "You embarrassed us," she said softly, as if the volume could soften the accusation. "You know how these things work. The bank needs signatures, that's all. You made it into a scene." Her voice trembled on the last word, betraying a flicker of fear she couldn't hide. I felt a strange satisfaction knowing I wasn't the only one shaken. "I didn't sign those papers," I replied, each word steady. "And you know it." Silence stretched across the kitchen, broken only by the soft tick of the clock above the stove. My stepfather cleared his throat and reached for the mail in my mother's hand, flipping through envelopes with deliberate nonchalance. A water bill. A grocery coupon. A thick envelope marked final notice that he quickly tucked to the bottom of the pile. That single movement sent a jolt through me. "Let me see that," I said. "It's nothing," he snapped, shoving the envelope into his jacket pocket. "Just a mix-up." But the crease in his forehead deepened, and I caught the faint smell of sweat beneath his cologne. A mix-up didn't smell like panic. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "What else have you signed in my name?" His eyes narrowed. "You watch too many detective shows," he said with a forced laugh. "Paranoid thinking. We're family. We look out for each other." Family. The word landed like a stone in my stomach. Before I could respond, my mother's cell phone buzzed on the counter. She snatched it up, glanced at the screen, and pressed it to her ear with her back to me. "Hello. Yes, we received it." "No, she doesn't know yet." Her voice dropped to a whisper as she moved toward the hallway. I caught only fragments. "Payment due. Keep quiet. Meeting tomorrow." Each half-heard word tightened the knot in my chest. I slipped my hand into my purse, brushing the edge of my phone. The recording from the bank was still running, but now I needed more. Quietly, I opened the voice memo app and started a new file, the red light hidden beneath the purse lining. My heart thudded, but my hands remained steady. If they thought I was helpless, they were about to learn otherwise. When my mother returned, her face was carefully composed. "Just a reminder about the neighborhood committee," she said too quickly. I smiled faintly. Of course. Neither of us believed the lie, but neither of us challenged it. The tension in the room pressed against my skin like static. I decided to step outside for air, but instead of heading to the front porch, I slipped quietly toward the small utility hallway near the back door. From there, voices carried clearly through the thin walls of the kitchen. I leaned against the cool plaster and listened. "Tomorrow morning," my stepfather said, his voice low but sharp. "She needs to sign before the deadline. If she calls a lawyer." "She won't," my mother interrupted. "She's too proud. She won't drag strangers into this." My stepfather exhaled, a rough, impatient sound. "She's not as weak as you think. I saw her face at the bank. She knows." A pause, then a softer tone. "We can still fix it. We just need her signature on the second mortgage." Second mortgage. The word sliced through me. The folder at the bank was only part of the scheme. I pressed a hand against the wall to steady myself. They had gambled with my name, my credit, my future, and now they planned to take more. The lemon-clean scent of the hallway turned sour in my nose. I wanted to burst in and confront them, but instinct told me to wait. Patience had already given me one advantage. It could give me more. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from Clara, my old college friend who now worked at a small law office downtown. "Still good for tonight?" I had messaged her earlier, before the bank meeting, asking for a quiet conversation. I typed back quickly, "Yes. Can we meet an hour later?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Of course. Be careful." I slipped the phone back into my purse and eased away from the wall just as my mother called my name. "There you are," she said with forced cheer. "We were just discussing dinner plans." I re-entered the kitchen, masking my pounding heart with a polite smile. "I'm not hungry," I said. "Long day." My stepfather studied me, searching for a crack in my calm. He found none. As dusk settled outside, I excused myself to the guest room under the pretense of resting. The room smelled faintly of cedar and old linen, a scent that once meant comfort when I visited for holidays. Tonight it smelled like strategy. I set my purse on the dresser and pulled out my phone, listening to the fresh recording. Every word was clear. The second mortgage, the deadline, their assumption that I would stay silent. Evidence, piece by piece, was falling into place. A floorboard creaked outside the door. I quickly locked my screen and slipped the phone beneath a pillow. My mother's soft knock followed. "Are you all right, honey?" I forced a steady breath. "Just tired." She hesitated, then said, "You know we only want what's best for the family." Her voice carried a strange mix of guilt and resolve. Before I could answer, her footsteps retreated down the hall. I sat on the edge of the bed, the house around me settling into the quiet rhythm of evening. Distant television chatter, the clink of dishes, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Each sound felt amplified, like the house itself was holding its breath. I thought of the manager's whispered advice at the bank, the hidden folder of forged papers, and now the second mortgage they planned to secure by morning. Every detail formed a pattern too deliberate to ignore. As the grandfather clock in the living room struck 8, I knew I couldn't stay. Clara would be waiting, and every minute here risked another trap. I slipped on my coat, careful not to let the old hinges of the guest room door creak. The hallway lights were dim, casting long shadows that stretched like warning fingers across the carpet. From the kitchen I heard my stepfather's voice, low, urgent, impossible to make out. My mother's reply was a soft murmur followed by a short, nervous laugh. I eased the front door open and stepped into the cool night air. The mist had thickened into a fine drizzle, coating the driveway in a silvery sheen. Each drop felt like a secret sliding against my skin. As I walked toward my car, the sound of a door opening behind me made my pulse quicken. I turned slowly. My stepfather stood on the porch, arms crossed, silhouette framed by the warm light spilling from the hallway. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his tone casual but edged with suspicion. The damp air carried the faint smell of his cologne, sharp and intrusive. I tightened my grip on my keys and forced a small smile. "Just clearing my head," I said. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once and stepped back inside. Only when the door clicked shut did I allow myself to breathe. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine and backed down the driveway, the headlights carving thin beams through the mist. In my purse, 2 recordings waited, proof of betrayal, ammunition for whatever came next. I didn't know how deep their scheme went, but I knew this. Tonight, behind those closed doors, I had uncovered the first cracks in their carefully built lies. And tomorrow those cracks would widen. Mist trailed behind my car as I steered away from my mother's house, the recordings safe in my purse and the night pressing against the windshield like a secret waiting to be used. My heart thudded in rhythm with the wipers, each beat reminding me that every mile brought me closer to Clara, and to the next move I hadn't dared to name out loud. The law office sat on the edge of downtown, a modest brick building with a flickering street lamp casting pale light across the wet pavement. I parked under the buzz of that lamp, the air thick with the smell of damp asphalt and old rain. Inside, a single bulb glowed in the reception area, warm and steady like a promise that someone was on my side. Clara stood when I entered, her silver hair tucked behind one ear, her sharp eyes softening when she saw me. "You look like you've been through a storm," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled faintly of vanilla lotion. "In more ways than one," I replied. I placed my purse on the table and took out my phone. "Listen to this," I said, pressing play. The quiet room filled with my mother's whisper and my stepfather's urgent voice. "Second mortgage, deadline, keep quiet." Clara's eyebrows rose with each passing second. "This is serious," she said when the recording ended. "They forged your signature once. They're planning more. We need to act before morning." Her calm tone steadied me even as my stomach churned. "What do we do?" I asked. "We build a case," she said. "And we start tonight." Clara unlocked a side cabinet and pulled out a thick binder of legal forms, the paper smelling faintly of fresh toner. "We'll need bank statements, property records, anything with your name and theirs," she explained. Her voice carried a quiet urgency, like someone who had walked this path many times before. I handed her the folder of documents I'd taken from my own files earlier that week, a precaution I hadn't fully understood until now. As she skimmed through the papers, I caught my reflection in the dark window. The woman staring back at me looked older than she had that morning, but stronger too. The tired lines around my eyes no longer felt like weakness, they felt like proof of survival. "We'll start with a cease and desist to freeze any immediate action," Clara said. "Then we'll petition the court for an emergency injunction. That buys us time to uncover everything else." Her words landed like stepping stones across a dangerous river. Each step forward steadied my breath. While Clara drafted the first letter, I called the bank manager from the parking lot. The cool night air carried the faint scent of wet pine from the nearby park. When he answered, I explained the situation in low, careful tones. He listened without interruption, then said, "I suspected something wasn't right. I'll prepare a statement confirming you disputed the signatures tonight." His quiet support felt like a lifeline. Back inside, Clara printed the documents and handed me a pen. "Sign here and here," she said. My hand trembled slightly as I signed my real name, bold, deliberate strokes reclaiming what had been stolen. For the first time all day I felt the balance begin to shift. By the time we finished, the clock on the wall showed nearly midnight. Clara insisted I stay at her place rather than return to my mother's house. "It's safer," she said. I hesitated, picturing my stepfather pacing their kitchen, wondering where I had gone. The thought only strengthened my resolve. "I'll stay," I said. Clara's guest room smelled faintly of lavender detergent, a gentle contrast to the sharp lemon cleaner of my mother's house. As I lay in the neatly made bed, exhaustion tugged at me but sleep refused to come. Every creak of the old house sounded like a warning. I replayed the recordings in my mind, each word a reminder of how far they were willing to go. Instead of fear, a slow burn of determination spread through me. Tomorrow the trap would begin to take shape. Morning arrived gray and damp. Over coffee, Clara reviewed the next steps. "We need more than recordings," she said. "Bank statements, notarized documents, anything proving a pattern." I nodded, already thinking of the locked file cabinet in my stepfather's home office. I had the spare key, an old habit from when I used to help with their bills years ago. By mid-afternoon, Clara had filed the injunction electronically. "That freezes major transactions for now," she said. "But we need evidence before they realize what's happening." The plan was simple but risky. I would return to the house under the pretense of retrieving personal items and gather whatever documents I could find. The drive back felt longer than the night before. Sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, throwing restless shadows across the road. When I reached the house, the driveway was empty. Relief and unease mixed in my chest. I unlocked the back door with the old spare key and slipped inside. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I moved quickly, the familiar scent of lemon cleaner turning my stomach. In the hallway I paused to listen. Nothing. I made my way to the small office off the living room, a room my stepfather once called private space. The door was locked, but the key slid in smoothly. Inside, the air smelled faintly of stale coffee and printer ink. Stacks of envelopes covered the desk. I began sorting through them, snapping quick photos with my phone. Overdue notices, bank letters, a second set of loan applications already half filled. Each click of the camera felt like a small victory. A faint creak on the front porch froze me in place. Footsteps. I held my breath as the doorknob rattled. Then my mother's voice floated through the door. "Hello? Anyone home?" I stuffed the last envelope into my purse, relocked the office door and slipped quietly toward the back. The door opened behind me as I eased through the kitchen. "Mom?" she called, her voice edged with uncertainty. I forced a calm reply from the hallway. "Just picking up a few things I left." Her shoes clicked against the tile as she approached. "You should have called," she said, her tone polite but sharp. "I didn't want to bother you," I answered, keeping my back to her so she couldn't see the papers hidden in my purse. Her gaze followed me as I stepped outside, but she didn't stop me. The air outside smelled of damp earth and the faint sweetness of blooming jasmine. I walked to my car with steady steps, resisting the urge to run. Back at Clara's office, we spread the documents across her desk. "This is more than enough to prove intent," she said, her eyes scanning each page. "They've applied for multiple loans using your information. Some are still pending. We can stop them. Her voice held a quiet triumph that matched the steady beat of my heart. Over the next 2 days we worked like a team of careful architects. Clara filed motions and secured temporary freezes on accounts. I contacted the credit bureaus to place alerts on my name, the phone calls blending into a blur of hold music and formal assurances. Each small action tightened the net around my mother and stepfather, though they remained unaware for now. Late one evening, while Clara reviewed yet another set of filings, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Where are you? We need to talk." I stared at the screen, the words glowing like a warning. Another followed moments later. "Please come home. We can fix this together." I set the phone face down without replying. Her sudden softness was another tactic, one I recognized all too well. Clara glanced up. "Everything okay?" "They're starting to feel it," I said quietly. "Good," she replied. "The more they scramble, the easier it is to see what they're hiding." That night, sleep came in restless fragments. Dreams of forged papers and whispered threats chased me through dark hallways. But each time I woke, I reminded myself of the progress we had made. Accounts frozen, legal filings in motion, evidence secured. The trap was no longer a plan. It was a structure with walls strong enough to hold. On the third morning, the bank manager called. "I thought you should know," he said, his voice low. "Your stepfather came in demanding access to the accounts. We informed him that all transactions are temporarily frozen." He wasn't pleased. I pictured the red flush of his anger, the way his jaw tightened when control slipped through his fingers. A quiet satisfaction warmed me from the inside. As I ended the call, Clara looked up from her desk. "They're boxed in," she said. "Now we wait for their next move." I nodded, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. For decades they had treated me like an afterthought, a signature to be used and discarded. Now every signature, my signature, belonged only to me. I stepped outside into the crisp afternoon air. The scent of wet pine lingered from last night's rain, cool and grounding. The sky, once heavy with clouds, now stretched wide and pale above me. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself a small smile. The trap was built. All that remained was to watch them walk into it. The trap was built. All that remained was to watch them walk into it. But knowing a storm is coming doesn't prepare you for the sound of the first crack of thunder. The morning began with a call from Clara before sunrise. "They filed an emergency motion," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "They're trying to unfreeze the accounts. Court hearing at 10. We need to be there." I sat on the edge of the bed, the room still dark, the smell of damp pine drifting through the slightly open window. My heart kicked into a faster rhythm, not of fear but of readiness. Today the walls would be tested. At the courthouse, a faint scent of old wood and floor polish greeted us. The long hallway buzzed with the low murmur of lawyers and clients, the shuffle of papers, the echo of shoes on marble. I clutched my folder of evidence, the texture of the manila cover grounding me in the chaos. Clara walked beside me, her posture calm and deliberate, her heels clicking with quiet authority. Through the glass doors of the courtroom I saw them, my mother and stepfather, standing with their attorney. My mother's cream sweater was replaced by a sharp navy jacket, her hair perfectly pinned, but I could see the restless flick of her fingers against the strap of her purse. My stepfather's face was flushed, his jaw set in a hard line. He looked smaller than I remembered, though the anger in his eyes tried to fill the space. When the judge entered, the room settled into an uneasy hush. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. As the proceedings began, their lawyer launched into a polished argument about family misunderstandings and clerical errors. His words were smooth, but each sentence carried the weight of desperation. I felt my pulse steady like a runner locking into pace. Clara rose, her voice clear and measured as she presented the evidence. Recordings, forged signatures, bank statements, and the manager's written statement. Every document landed on the judge's desk like a quiet hammer. I watched my mother's eyes dart from page to page, each flicker of recognition a silent confession. My stepfather sat rigid, a muscle in his cheek twitching with each new piece of proof. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Given the substantial evidence," he said, "the motion to unfreeze the accounts is denied pending full investigation." The gavel struck once, the sound sharp and final. For a heartbeat, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fans. Then the tension cracked like dry wood. My stepfather surged to his feet. "This is ridiculous," he barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "This is our family." The bailiff stepped forward, calm but firm. "Sir, please remain seated." His outburst only deepened the judge's frown. I stayed seated, my hands folded neatly in my lap. Inside, a wave of relief rolled through me, warm and steady. But beneath that relief was a sharper edge, an awareness that this was only the first collapse. The real walls were still standing, and I intended to watch each one fall. Outside the courthouse, the crisp air carried the scent of rain-soaked concrete. Clara touched my arm. "They'll fight harder now," she said. "Be ready for surprises." I nodded, my mind already turning to the next step. The injunction held, but the investigation had only begun. We stopped by the bank to deliver the court order in person. The manager met us in his office, the same kind eyes now bright with quiet satisfaction. "This protects you," he said, sliding the stamped document into a secure file. "But expect pressure. They may try to approach you directly." His warning settled over me like a second skin. That afternoon, I returned to Clara's office to review more documents. The smell of fresh toner filled the room as we sorted through statements and call logs. One envelope stood out, a recent letter from a small credit union I'd never used. Inside was a notice of a pending application for a personal loan in my name. The date was only 3 days old. "They're still trying," Clara said, shaking her head. "But this gives us more leverage." She drafted another motion while I called the credit union to flag the application. Each action felt like tightening another board on the trap, each signature another nail. As dusk settled, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Where are you?" My mother's voice, low and urgent. "We need to talk. Privately." I steadied my breath. "I'm busy," I said. "This isn't the time." "There won't be a time if you keep this up," she snapped, then softened. "Peace, honey. Let's meet tonight. Just us." I ended the call without agreeing. Her sudden desperation was both warning and confirmation. They were running out of moves. That night, Clara insisted we stay cautious. "They might try to corner you emotionally," she said. "Don't give them the chance." Still, I couldn't shake the weight of my mother's voice, the pleading beneath the anger, the faint crack of someone realizing the ground beneath her feet was giving way. The next morning brought another surprise. An investigator from the county clerk's office arrived with a request for a recorded statement. He wore a neatly pressed shirt and carried a leather notebook that smelled of new leather and rain. As he explained the process, I felt the first true taste of accountability in the air. This wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was the slow machinery of justice beginning to move. During the interview, he asked for every detail. The bank visit, the overheard conversation, the documents from the locked office. My voice stayed steady, but inside I felt each memory like a bruise pressed by careful fingers. When he finished, he closed his notebook with a quiet snap. "This will move quickly," he said. "Given the evidence, we can pursue charges for fraud and forgery." The word charges rang in the room like a hidden bell. I nodded, feeling both vindicated and strangely hollow. Years of subtle control and quiet dismissals were now crystallizing into something the law could name. Later that day, Clara received notice of a second hearing scheduled for the following week to determine temporary possession of disputed funds. "They're going to lose access to everything if this holds," she said, her eyes gleaming with restrained triumph. "But they won't go quietly." Her prediction proved right by evening. A thick envelope slid beneath Clara's office door contained a handwritten note from my stepfather. "This isn't over. Families don't betray each other." The irony tightened my chest but did not shake my resolve. For decades they had defined family as obedience. Today, family meant accountability. The following morning brought the most dramatic collapse yet. While reviewing new bank statements, Clara received a call from the sheriff's office. An attempt had been made to withdraw funds from one of the frozen accounts using a forged authorization letter. The attempt failed, but the report added another layer to the case. When I heard the details, a strange calm settled over me. The walls weren't just cracking, they were caving in. Their desperate scramble had become evidence, each reckless act sealing the very outcome they feared. Late that afternoon, we returned to the courthouse for an emergency update. Rain streaked the tall windows, blurring the world outside into silver smudges. Inside, the air smelled of damp coats and nervous energy. The judge reviewed the new reports with a frown. These actions strengthen the petition for full asset protection, he said. Until further notice, all accounts remain under court control. Across the room my mother's shoulders sagged. For the first time she looked not angry but exhausted, as if the weight of every hidden choice had finally settled on her back. My stepfather stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, his face pale against the dark wood of the bench. When the gavel struck again, the sound echoed through the chamber like the closing of a heavy door. It was the sound of their freedom narrowing, of years of quiet manipulation crumbling under the weight of evidence. As we left the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The sky glowed with the muted light of a late winter afternoon, clouds thinning to reveal a pale stretch of blue. I inhaled deeply, the air cool and clean against my skin. Beside me, Clara smiled faintly. "This is the beginning of the end," she said. I didn't answer right away. Inside, a complex tide of emotions rose. Relief, sorrow, a flicker of grief for the family I wished I'd had. But above it all was a steady current of resolve. The walls around them were falling and I was finally standing on solid ground. The courthouse doors closed behind us, the echo of the last gavel strike still ringing in my ears. The cool air tasted different, crisp, almost sweet, as if the entire city had taken a deep breath with me. For months I had carried the weight of secrets and forged signatures. Now the law itself stood between me and the people who once claimed to love me. The walls had fallen, but the final chapter still waited inside me like a locked drawer. Clara drove while I watched the fading courthouse in the side mirror. Rainwater streaked the glass, distorting the building into a wavering shadow of itself. "They'll have to comply with the investigation," she said, eyes steady on the road. "They can't touch your accounts. The next step is distribution of assets and restitution." Her words landed like soft stones, solid, grounding, impossible to ignore. I nodded, but part of me wasn't ready to celebrate. Justice on paper is powerful, but the heart needs more than legal victories. When we reached her office, Clara poured 2 mugs of coffee, the aroma warm and earthy. "They may reach out again," she said. "If they do, you decide whether to speak or stay silent. The case is strong enough to stand without you." I wrapped my hands around the mug, the heat seeping into my palms. "I want the truth on record," I said quietly. "But I don't need their apology. Not anymore." Clara gave a small, approving nod. That evening, after filing the last of the court papers, I drove back to my mother's house for the first time since the hearing. The driveway was empty. The house stood dark except for a single lamp glowing in the front window. I unlocked the door with my spare key, the familiar click echoing through the silent hallway. Inside, the lemon cleaner smell was faint, almost gone, replaced by the dusty scent of neglect. On the kitchen table lay a plain envelope addressed to me. No stamps, no markings, just my name in my mother's delicate handwriting. I sat down, the wooden chair creaking under my weight, and opened it. Inside were 2 items, a folded sheet of paper and a small silver key I recognized from childhood. The paper contained a brief note. "I never wanted this to happen. I let fear guide me. The key is for the cedar chest in the attic." "Mom." My pulse quickened. The cedar chest had been locked for years, always explained away as old keepsakes. I climbed the narrow attic stairs, each step groaning beneath me. The air smelled of dry wood and faded memories. In the corner sat the chest, its surface coated in a thin layer of dust. The key turned with a soft click. Inside, among brittle photographs and yellowed letters, rested a thick folder bound with a worn ribbon. I untied it and began to read. The documents inside weren't just about the loans. They were records of years of quiet manipulation, bank transfers, property deeds, and letters between my mother and stepfather plotting how to use my name to secure their finances. But tucked between the papers was something I didn't expect. A series of letters written by my mother to herself, unsent confessions spanning decades. The first letter stopped me cold. "I married him for security. I told myself it was for the family, but I knew he wanted control. If anything happens to me, I hope my daughter finds the strength I never did." I sat on the attic floor, the letters trembling in my hands. The betrayal was deeper than I imagined, but so was the truth. My mother had been both victim and accomplice, trapped by fear and poor choices. Her silence wasn't just greed, it was survival. The realization tightened my chest with a complicated mix of sorrow and understanding. I gathered the letters and the folder, locking the chest behind me. Downstairs, the house felt emptier than ever. The walls that once held family dinners and Sunday laughter now echoed with the quiet collapse of a life built on lies. Before leaving, I placed the key back in the envelope and left it on the kitchen table. No note. Just the key, an unspoken message that I had found everything and no longer needed their permission. The next morning, Clara and I met with the investigator to hand over the new documents. His eyes widened as he skimmed the letters. "This will accelerate restitution," he said. "These records show intent, planning, and coercion. It strengthens every charge." I signed another affidavit, my pen steady. With each signature, I felt pieces of the past releasing their grip. Days turned into a quiet rhythm of court updates and legal filings. Neighbors who once waved politely now avoided my mother's property, whispers of the investigation traveling faster than the spring breeze. I heard from the bank manager that my stepfather had attempted to negotiate privately but was denied. Their empire of control had turned into a cage of their own making. 1 week later, the court ruled in my favor. All fraudulent loans were voided. Restitution was ordered to repay the damages, and both my mother and stepfather were barred from accessing any account in my name. When Clara handed me the final judgment, the embossed seal caught the light like a small sun. I traced the raised edges with my finger, the texture both real and surreal. But legal victory was only part of my revenge. True freedom meant reclaiming the ordinary joys they once overshadowed. That evening, I returned to my own house, a small, cozy place they had always dismissed as too modest. The kitchen smelled of freshly brewed tea and the faint sweetness of vanilla candles. I set the cedar letters on the table and prepared a simple dinner: roasted vegetables, warm bread, and a single glass of wine. The soft clatter of dishes felt like music after months of tense silence. As I ate, memories surfaced. Holidays where my opinions were dismissed, phone calls where my choices were questioned, years of subtle control hidden behind smiles. Every bite tasted like reclamation. The table that once hosted their criticisms now held only my food, my papers, my hard-won peace. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Please talk to me, Mom." I stared at the glowing words for a long moment. The part of me that once craved her approval felt a faint tug, but it no longer controlled me. I set the phone face down without replying. Silence, I realized, was the most powerful response I could give. Later that night, Clara stopped by with a bottle of sparkling cider. "To closure," she said, raising her glass. "To freedom," I replied. We clinked glasses, the soft chime echoing through the quiet kitchen. The sound felt like a benediction. After she left, I sat alone at the table, the final documents spread before me like a map of battles won. Outside, the night air carried the scent of blooming jasmine. Inside, the steady tick of the clock marked each passing second of a life fully reclaimed. I thought of my mother's letters, of the fear that had guided her choices. I would carry those truths with me, not as chains but as lessons. Her weakness had tried to become my prison. Instead, it became my path to strength. For the first time in years, I felt no need to look over my shoulder. No hidden loans. No forged signatures. No whispered threats disguised as family concern. Just the quiet certainty of ownership. Of my name, my future, my voice. I cleared the table slowly, savoring the ordinary tasks. The smooth weight of the plates, the soft hiss of running water, the warm scent of clean towels. These small, simple actions felt more victorious than any courtroom declaration. They were proof that I was finally living on my own terms. Before heading to bed, I placed the final court order in a wooden frame and set it on a shelf above the kitchen table. The embossed seal caught the glow of the overhead light, shining like a quiet promise. It wasn't just a legal document. It was the visible end of a long, hidden war. I poured the last sip of wine and raised the glass in a silent toast. To the manager who whispered the first warning, to Clara who stood beside me, and to the part of myself that refused to stay silent. The house settled around me with a gentle creak, the kind of sound that once made me feel lonely but now felt like company. I took a deep breath, the air rich with the scent of tea and faint jasmine drifting through the open window. This was freedom. Not loud or dramatic. Not a single moment of triumph, but a steady, unshakable truth. I ran my fingers along the smooth surface of the table, my table, where no one would ever again place papers for me to sign without understanding. The wood felt warm beneath my touch, solid and entirely mine. For the first time in a lifetime, I was exactly where I wanted to be. And I intended to stay. I owned my name, my home, and every quiet breath of the life they once tried to steal. And that was the sweetest revenge of all. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now for more powerful emotional stories of betrayal and revenge. Join a community where women's voices and victories are heard.